according to my watch. So let's just move right into this discussion of building a choir intergenerationally. As we begin today, first of all, why do I think this is a good time to talk about this topic, and then a bit of why I'm choosing to discuss the topic. First of all, I think I've observed in the last number of years at Alleluia, as I've done the Minister of Music Forum, the Roundtable Forum for the last 8 or 10 years, the question that comes up most frequently, as we always ask somebody to present a challenge that maybe you would like a little input about, or maybe you'd like a group to speak toward, or something like that. The challenge that comes up the most frequently around the table is our choir is declining, our choir is aging. That's the number one challenge that is around the room. And even the ones who are doing better, everybody says, you know, we're not quite where we were. Things are looking, and if we keep on the trajectory, then play this out 10 to 15 years, and I'm about the one left, you know. So we hear that story a lot. So that's really gotten me thinking a lot. Another is, just to emphasize the importance, we had this session, this Pie Talk this week, and the topic of the Pie Talk was where are we going? From where I sit, the future of our field, future of church music, something along those lines. What came up in a hopeful way with every single person who presented was the possibility for intergenerational work. And everybody said, I believe intergenerational direction is where we're heading. And both people that represented major publishing companies said the things that sell the most in our company right now is anything that involves intergenerational forces. And those things just fly off the shelves. So everybody's looking for intergenerational stuff. So that's important, I think. I think that's another thing to say. Another thing that's been on my radar in the last several months is that, and I've known about this, but it's been a little bit more directly in my sphere, is the study that the Lilly Endowment is doing about intergenerational worship and the possibility and study of intergenerational interaction within congregations. And Lilly is putting millions and millions right now into studying intergenerational, how can intergenerational work be done better? From perhaps, for instance, the perspective of what about churches that are the size of our church and smaller, who are big enough that you're expected to have a full-fledged youth ministry, but not always large enough to afford it. And what do you do? And how do you involve youth in those small, mid-size churches, and what do you do about that? And how do we involve people intergenerationally? That's another thing that's come to my attention. And then when you look at the body of growing body of literature, you see that people are studying this are saying that when we have intergenerational experiences, students, young people tend to stay in church longer. They tend to continue church involvement at the college level, and they tend to continue involvement after college when they've had those intergenerational experiences. There's also the body of literature, which I think wouldn't surprise a whole bunch of us, but is quite valid, is that the single most important entity within a young person's growing faith is the influence and the role of parents. And students who have strong parental support are the ones who tend to stay involved in the congregation. So the parent is still the most important entity. I think a lot of us know that, but I think we have had, again, a generation of parents who really didn't want to accept that responsibility fully, perhaps. My read, maybe. But I think we do have some parents, I think we have a little bit different take on parents now. A lot of young parents I know, they really do want to do the right thing by their kid. They just don't always know what that is. And I think that's a place where we need help. So as I thought about doing this topic this year, I often will ask my students, what have I been talking about a lot, or what have you heard sort of passionate around me, or what do you think I ought to talk about? And I usually get ideas of whatever I do at Alleluia from my students. When they said, well, you ought to speak about intergenerational stuff, that's something you talk about in class, something you've done at church. Just tell your story about what you've done, and so that's another part of it. When I began to look at, so what does some of the literature say, I ended up ordering a whole bunch of books, which is my new way of doing research, is Googling something and then ordering everything I see about it. And so I ordered a bunch of books, and then in the last few weeks especially, I've been reading these books. Actually, some of these I already had. But a book that I would encourage you to look at is called Sticky Faith. It's been in the bookstore here this week. It's a good little book that will take you a couple hours to read. It's just an easy read, and it's pleasant, enjoyable. But I would encourage you to read it, and the idea is what kind of faith is it that sticks with a kid, and what is it that will stick for time. You see some quotes here, these are all from this book. But kids experience Jesus Christ when adults in the congregation give them grace, time, and a genuine love with no hidden agenda. Nice quote there. Your church and your friendships can offer nourishing ties. The point is to build social capital into your child's life, creating a network of caring believers who will pray for and mentor and bless your children with their presence over the course of their lives. When we got our children a number of years ago, we have a 20-year-old and a 24-year-old. One of the primary goals for our children would be that they would have relationships outside their parents. As many meaningful relationships, as many adults as we could pull around them to rally in their lives. That's proven, as our children have experienced various challenges, it's proven to be one of the richest resources of their lives when there have been people to pray for them, there have been people that know them, there have been people to check in on them, and people to nurture their lives. And so I would encourage that for sure. And this book talks about that. By far the number one way that churches make teens in your church feel welcomed and valued was when adults in the congregation show an interest in them. And I think, just to go a little bit further with that, sometimes it's a bit challenging when we think about ourselves in terms of reaching out to kids. I have this perception that most of us are afraid of teenagers. Okay. And I talk to students about that because I think college students are particularly afraid of teenagers oftentimes because we don't know what to expect with teenagers. Teenagers they can be ultra critical, they can be petty, they can be all sorts of things. And I think a lot of times, and we don't know what to say to them. You know, how many times have you ever had a conversation with a teenager and you said 2 or 3 things and then what do you say from there? You know, and you just really don't know what to say. I can feel that, and I also think that oftentimes as we change perspectives in our lives and we grow older, there was a time when I was a cool person to a teenager. Okay, I'm not a cool person to a teenager for the most part, although, I don't know, maybe there's something cool about having gray hair and being sort of on the verge of grandpa-ness, you know, or something like that. You know, I don't know. Maybe that's not a bad thing either. I did spend most of yesterday afternoon with the youth lab students, and I thoroughly enjoyed my time with them and just found it incredibly delightful. I love college kids, but I also try every Sunday at our church to speak to the teenagers. And I try to make sure that I have some conversation with them every week. I'll go on to say one of the best practices I think about if you have an intergenerational group in your church is I try to speak to every person that sings in our choir every week, which is about 40 folks or so. I try to make sure that I have some eye contact. For years in classes, I've tried to make sure that I had at least a couple second gaze with every single person in every single class. You know, try to make sure that they know we connected in some way. And I try to do that with the people that come to church, but I stand at the door as they leave. That's the only way I can catch them. But I particularly engage the teenagers. And then oftentimes they're waiting around to have parents come pick them up. And when they do, then I always wait with them. Of course, you have to wait with them, but I always do, and that gives me some time to say, what's going on at school? How's this? What's going on? And I find that I have these really nice conversations with them that I find really enjoyable. So the more conversations you have with a teenager, the easier they become, typically. I would also just say that even if you have a conversation with a teenager that's awkward, an awkward conversation is better than no conversation. And silence is better than nothing. I just think that's important. So just to free us all, because I'm just saying, here are the challenges. Anyway, those are some of the things that the research says. I'm going to pass these books around, and I thought you might just I like to look at a book rather than just hear about it. So I brought these up here. Here's the Sticky Faith book. Here is another book called The Sticky Faith Guide for Your Family. Have any of you read this book? Anybody seen it? I read the book last week, and I think this is a book that I might buy and give to new parents in our church, to families who have new babies, or to people that I know. There's some families in our church that we have good relationships with them, and they've talked with us a lot about parenting through the years, and so I sometimes buy books if I find something and say, it's just something I thought you all might like to see. So I sometimes will pass things around to people that I know. So this is a good book you might want to look at. This book called Growing Young, Ways to Help Young People Discover and Love Your Church. It's by, so you see some of these same authors are writing on the same subjects, but it's also helpful. This book called Messy Church, it's really a movement kind of called Messy Church, and it's about how to launch into being a place where you'd say, well, everything's not all neat and clean around here, and everything's not just perfect, and we're going to live within some bigger priorities and maybe put up with a bit of messiness. And then it actually encourages you to have some regular activities. This is a book that I had not read about, but in the last 2 weeks, a student, former student of mine, sent me this title and said, you need to read this book. So it's called Our Kids. It's been around 2 or 3 years. It's by the same Putnam who wrote Bowling Alone and some other things that some people that I'm familiar with. But he said, you really need to read this book, and you need to read it before your class next spring. So this is one of my former students giving me an assignment, which I always take seriously. And I'm grateful to have. So this is a book I'm going to look at, but it talks about the situation of kids in our culture. All right, now back to the subject, or differently to the subject. So this is a bit of an autobiographical presentation. So what about our church? If we're talking about the intergenerational experience that we've had in our church, who is our church and who are we? We have an average attendance of about 220, probably 210 to 220. Last Sunday, I think we were 170 or something like that. We get attendance stuff every week. We will go to 240, something like that on the big day, 275 maybe, 100th anniversary or something, something like that. But we're not a big church. We're one of those churches that has stuff, but we don't have a lot of money. We have an old building. I'm sure that would resonate with some of you. We have a full-time pastor, and we have 3 part-time staff people, and I'm one of those. And you see who those people are. All of the staff are under 30, including the pastor, except for me, and I am nearly double 30, not quite. So it's quite a different stage to be that guy. Yeah. We're located in one of the poorest zip codes in America, and our church has celebrated 100th anniversary just this year. Our church made the decision not to relocate in the 1980s and 90s when that was a big deal. We're the only church in our part of Waco that didn't relocate or didn't give their building to a minority congregation. Yeah. So we're the only one that's been there all those years, and we chose to stay there. We're a moderate Baptist church. We have the second female pastor that we've had in 20 years. We were the first Baptist church in Texas to have a woman pastor, and now we didn't hire 2 women in sequence, but one person between them, we have another woman who's a delightful young woman who's very gifted. We have 1 weekly worship gathering, 1 service on a Sunday. We utilize many styles and genres of congregational songs, scriptural testimony, etc. The worship that you've experienced at Alleluia through the years and this week would be not unlike worship at our church every Sunday. Meaning it's very diverse, very creative maybe, there's nothing we can't do. We just don't. We don't plan worship by our limitations. We always plan worship by what would be great for the service. And we do plan by how can we pull this off. But the question, how can we pull this off, is always after we've decided what would work. How can you make this fit? But it's diverse. Our worship is planned by a core team of 7 people. Right now, we meet. This is a new model that we've never done until this past year. But we will meet in August in a couple weeks. We will meet for 2 half days for 4 hours, so 8 hours total. We will plan all worship from September through the middle of January. And then we will meet once a month for an hour to check what's going on for the next 4 or 5 weeks, and to kind of check in. And until then, we've used to meet every week, and then we met every 2 weeks for 2 hours. And we've done different models, but this model is the one that we're on right now. And we're trying this model because it's frankly easier for me, and I think for others on our planning team, to meet for large portions of time infrequently rather than bigger chunks as frequent. And it's also helped us to see worship a bit more as like, within 3 months, what have we done? And how much have we done of this, and look at themes and larger patterns and things like that. So, everything you do is a process, and you try something, you try it again, and maybe you go back to something you've done before, you use a hybrid, you shift, whatever. So you do what works. We utilize an organ, a piano, a band, a vocal ensemble of 4 singers, and a choir. We have a paid organist and pianist, and the organist also serves as a part-time music associate and administrator, does a lot of the administrative stuff. The choir at our church has about 45 members. We order 60 pieces of music because we have about that many people that come sometimes and tie up a folder. And would be offended if you gave up their folder. And they do show up, but we're kind of church where somebody might come for 2 weeks and be gone for 4. And then cycle back in and cycle out and come, and we say welcome. We really do welcome that sort of participation because that's the reality of who our church is. We sing every Sunday. We do 2 times a year. We do a choir-led worship. We call it choir-led worship. We don't do musicals. We don't do cantatas. We don't call it that. We call it choir-led worship, which means we sing. It's almost with us always a section of some anthems that we incorporate with congregational elements of some sort, and testimonies and scripture readings, and usually a very brief homily, 4 or 5 minute little homily within that service. But we do that a couple of times a year. We, for years, only did a Christmas one of those. And then 3 or 4 years ago, something like that, I thought, well, let's do something in the spring. Let's have some, and it was more of in the Easter season. It was not Easter, because Easter is not it's not a day you can count on everybody to come at our church, because we have a lot of college connected people. So people often go from our church at Easter because we have 2 holidays. We have a Friday off and a Monday off. They leave rather than everybody comes, which I discovered years ago with a big anthem on Easter Sunday, when I realized the Wednesday before that we have too many people gone, and I ended up calling every friend in town trying to just get people to come sing. You can't change some things at the last minute. Anyway, I learned that through the years that Easter is not our best day, but the Easter season is. Just again, not to go into too much detail, but what we do in the spring event is we will sing 6 to 8 pieces somewhere between January and the end of April, usually is when we will do this event, this other worship-led thing. And we will take 6 or 8 pieces that we've already sung during the season of Lent and early Easter and in January, and then pull those 8 pieces back and put them into one service. I learned a long time ago that when you're singing new repertoire, most people in the congregation don't recognize that they've heard it until maybe 3 times. So the first time you sing it, people just, it kind of flies over them. Second time they think, I might have heard that before. Third time they think, I like that. That's one of my favorite songs. So it takes a number of repetitions for congregation, even though for you, you're already thinking, oh my gosh, we sing this all the time. So we have done that kind of thing. And then that works really well, and then we don't have to kill ourselves learning a whole program of something. There are some exceptions to that we've done, but not much. We also sing for a service in December that we call a consolation service. And it's a service for people in grief that we've done I've done in churches since the early 90s, because I discovered it from a church in St. Louis that I had friends at. But we have this service. It's not a sellout or anything like that, It might be our choir, and it's one of the things we say, this is a ministry. It might be our choir and 25, 30 other people. That's usually about the extent of it. But for the people that come, it's really critical and a really important time. But it's a time for people to grieve in December, when oftentimes we're all only told to be happy. So it's meaningful. We also sing every year for Good Friday. We do a Maundy, Thursday, and a Good Friday service. We sing for the Good Friday service. Again, just the way we do it. Why do we always sing for Good Friday instead of Maundy, Thursday? We just do. The choir sits with the congregation, and they come forward to sing the anthem. That's something we've done for 18 years. Our choir loft is now gone. So people come into our church, they think we don't have a choir. And then in the service, at some point, this very large group, I bet we had 40 people last Sunday morning, about 25 men, and not enough women. A bunch of men last Sunday for some reason. But people come up from the congregation at some point. How do we bring those people up in the service? We normally extend the introduction to the piece of music. So the pianist will just improvise somewhere within the anthem. And then our rule is always, I never conduct until it's the actual introduction to the song. So when I start conducting, I'm not bringing you in. We're looping back to the beginning. So sometimes we just come up silently, depending on what's happening before, and what the feel and the spirit of things are. And but we always come up. We sing at all kinds of places within the service. So it's not just the choir sings at this one time every week. We typically only do one thing per Sunday. We don't sing a call to worship and an anthem and all that stuff. The question is, so who leads your worship? Well, we have an ensemble that does that, a vocal ensemble. Everybody that sings in the vocal ensemble also sings in the choir, with an occasional emergency exception. But normally that's the way it is. So, I've also, if you have any hesitations about using an ensemble in worship, which I had all this, imagination built up in my head, years ago, and then I started working with one, and I found out, this is just the coolest thing imaginable, because you have 4 people who are your better readers and better singers, and then you can assign a descant to someone who actually is a microphone and who practiced it ahead of time, instead of taking 30 minutes in a rehearsal to teach a descant to a group of sopranos, and then by Sunday morning they've all forgotten it because sopranos don't read things that aren't melodic. You stagger, something for one beat and hold something, and they're all, they've botched it. Anyway, just things like that. So I've learned that, like Sunday morning, we did a song that had a world music component. I had the 4 singers come down. Sunday morning was Around. We did a theme song that we've been doing for a series, and it can be sung in canon. We've done a 5-week series, so we sang it 3 Sundays without the round. We sang it 1 Sunday with the round, only the ensemble singing the round. Then last week I went down and said, okay, congregation, this song is around, and we're all going to participate. So we all practiced it, and then I had somebody in front of every section to lead that round. So I had all this help, To utilize these people, not just with mic, they weren't even on the mic at that point, see. So we utilize them in different ways. Whatever you need people to help with, scripture reading, things like that, use them. Okay, so we come forward, sing the anthem. We sing 51 weeks out of the year. The only Sunday that we don't sing is the Sunday after Christmas, the Sunday between Christmas and New Year's. But we sing Spring Break every time. That's work for us. And our people like to sing. They come to church, they expect to sing, they want to sing. That's my thing I do. And we take great pride in that. We have never canceled an anthem on a Sunday morning, even in the sunlight of summer. Okay. And I have had a tenor sing falsetto one time, the soprano part. Our friend Ross Tarpley jumped to the soprano part one time and made it work. But other than that, we've always made it, and we still made it. We don't rehearse any time except an hour on Wednesday night. And an hour is never enough. An hour and 15 minutes is an amazing amount, great amount of time. But we have an hour, and an hour is all our people believe they can give. And frankly, as a bivocational person, it's about all I need to give, even if I gave more. What we do is extend our rehearsal by 15 minutes, usually 4 weeks prior to anything that we do, like a Christmas program. So we go 15 minutes extra, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, and the week before 1 hour, so that we end up with a 2-hour rehearsal. When we do something big on a Sunday morning, then we come at 8 o'clock and rehearse for an hour and a half before Sunday school with an instrumental group. If we have instruments, we only have them on the Sunday morning. When we have instruments, we never have large instrumental groups. I'm not a believer that 45 singers need 25 instruments. I think that 5 is good for our choir. A chamber group of some sort is a beautiful experience, and we can write some parts. I can solo them out give them little parts and descants and obligatos, and somebody play the bass, and we can reinforce and have this really delightful experience by choosing some key instruments that fit the music that we're doing, and then we don't cover everybody up. So again, my observation, I don't is much like just to have a big old orchestra, and then you have to mic the choir so much that why do we even rehearse, because all we're doing is screaming and singing as loud as we possibly can. And I know that sounds critical, but it has worked well. And I've used lots of combinations, but don't get too many brass, because one brass player can cover up 45 singers if it's not a finessed player, somebody who really knows what to do. Horn is a great connector between instruments, and horns can fit with strings and all kinds, things like that. We sing every Sunday in the summer. We work on 10 choral pieces during the month of May, and then we sing those for June, July, and half of August, and then we start back in the middle of August. But we do not rehearse during those 10 summer weeks. We gather from 10:30 to 10:45 for our 11 and a half minutes of rehearsal. I say that is the most stressful 10 minutes in the week of any music director. That little bit of time you get to rehearse. The pressure is on, and it will show your skill. Your skill will never be more evident than in your ability to pull a choir together, many of whom were not there Wednesday night or the last 2 weeks. So that's a challenge for all of us to say, how well can you do that job? Yeah. So I always take that as, who am I? What can I do here? And take it, not in a bad way, but whatever. Currently, we have 5 people who have music degrees in our choir, and 3 college music majors. We have 5 married couple pairs, so that's 10 people, okay? And we have 4 parent-child pairs. So we're at least one parent is singing in the choir with the kid. We're a fluid group. We are continually joining and exiting. We are very fluid. Lots of shifts of other people. Yeah. My experience. My experience was growing up in a church without abundant musical resources. Everything was intergenerational. If we had it, it was intergenerational. Christmas program, intergenerational. I started singing in the adult choir when I was in the 4th grade. And that's because I was very intrigued by the alto part. And I decided I wanted to learn to sing alto. I was that kid, who just loved music, and I wanted to sing the alto part. So my dad said, well, why don't you just come to the choir and sit with the altos? And we rehearsed after church on Sunday night for about 20 minutes, and we sang through some song for Sunday, and it was some gospel song that we sang. that often had a cool alto part. So that was my start of choir. I have observed that both the gifts and the challenges of very much age-specific delineations. And I think that when you have great leadership, most all groups thrive. I believe that good leadership thrives almost regardless. But when the leadership is not as strong, then the busier people are, the more they will not come and be a part of things because of the challenges that are there. And it might just not be that extra 2 or 3% of compelling that they might have had in some other environment. So I've seen it work really well and really not so well. Recent experiences with establishing a new model was, let's look down below. How did we move to this model? When I was at this church at Calvary Baptist from 2001 to 2009, with some very difficult experiences in our congregation. I left in 2009, and on sort of unprecedented move, I came back to Calvary 3.5 years later for a story for another day, but came back to that congregation. When I came back to the congregation, the youth choir had really not flourished, and the adult choir was back to 12 or 15 people, something like that, basically a strong person or so on the part, and it really declined. So we were rebuilding everything. We had had challenges with youth choir for a number of years because I had to make the decision that I couldn't direct the youth choir and do all the other things that I did. So when we were able to get good leadership with some continuity for 2 or 3 years, the youth choir would rebuild and be relatively strong. But when we had somebody who we could get there for a year or something and might not have a lot of experience or winsomeness or whatever, then I ended up spending all my time coaching them and helping, and then I was doing a lot of choir rehearsals to beef up everything, and it was just a challenge. So I knew I couldn't do that. I started back to this church in November, first Sunday in November, and they wanted a big Christmas program, in 6 weeks, which was I'm always up for a challenge, it's fun to pull that together. So we decided, let's get everybody involved, all the youth and everybody, and lots of people came, let's all make something good of this, And I just had this idea, why don't we try this experiment and try what would an intergenerational choir look like? We also had in our church some good high school kids, that sang in choir, played in the band, were musical, and would have been frustrated with a not very good musical experience with people their age, and frustrated with that. So we put those kids right in and tried this experiment, and then it just became what we did. It's just the way it happened. We also had in a smaller church, you have a lot of duplication of people doing the same things. So you probably have the same people singing in an adult choir who lead children's music. And if you have a handbell group, you probably have the same people playing in the handbell group. If you have an instrumental group, you probably got the same people doing all of that. Well, I learned about 30 years ago that even though on paper you're doing everything imaginable and it all looks perfect, if you're duplicating all the same people, everybody will burn out. And then in about 3 years, nothing is going to go well. So I've learned from that experience as a young minister of music, it's better to say, what are the 2 or 3 things that we do really well in our church? And then put a lot of energy into those things and do it very, very well. So that was another of my experiences. Need for pulling everybody together, etc. I think that's pretty much all the reasons why we went to the model. What are the payoffs? Renewed energy for everybody involved. So I think it's been very much a renewal experience. Greater friendships develop beyond age groups. That's a beautiful thing to see when you see a relationship develop in our choir. There's a young man who sings in our choir that is just beloved high school kid who has these old guys just think he's such a cool guy, so fun. And it's just, you can just see these great relationships, it just makes me smile every time I see it. Greater appreciation for God's stories. I think we all need to be reminded that God was working with us as teenagers, And young people need to know that God works continually, that God's in all of our lives. Younger voices enhance older voices, and vice versa. It really is just amazing how the combination can work out so well. Youth have older people supporting them in their extracurricular activities. As a consequence of relationships, a number of people, older people in our congregation, middle-aged people or whatever, go to more high school events than they would ever go to and support the kids in our choir when they're doing whatever they're doing. A couple of our college kids did recitals this spring, and we had a whole bunch of our folks that came to the recitals. We also, the young kid, the high school kids, junior high kids, all wanted to go to the recital of the college kids. So then their parents went, which was a whole nother experience. And I had this one mom said, I've never been to a college recital. I had no idea what you all do over there in that place, And just worlds open up, And so it's those kind of interactive things are God moments for me. College students have older people walking with them through life events. This past year, we had a young woman that sings in our choir, and she had a lot of family challenges. Her sister had struggled and was in various rehab and therapy and things like that. And every week we pray for this young woman, and she presented prayer request. And one week I just said, let's all just join around and have a prayer for this young woman. And we all laid hands on her and had a prayer at the end of the rehearsal. And later that week she said, I've never had older people that I knew cared about me and supported me like that. And she said, that's just changed my life, and I really believe God's going to do something, in my family. So that's real stuff, you all. Older people have the joy of younger friends. I read a quote many years ago. I wish I could tell you who it's by, but I'll think of it in a moment. Anyway, the quote was paraphrased, said that if we only have friends that are our age, then if we live long enough, we will have no friends. I've been aware of that quote. I read that quote about 35 years ago. I remember where I was when I read it and exactly the context of it. But I've been aware of that my entire life, and the joy I've had is having friends younger than I am. And Brenda and I have intentionally loved having friends who are younger than we. So I think it's a great thing. I would also say my mother is 82. And I talk to my mother every day. And when I talk to my mother, one of the things I do most these days is saying, now, where did you go yesterday? Meaning, where did you get out of the house? Well, I'm just real comfortable staying here and this, and I'm saying, well, not today. Let's go somewhere. Let's get out. Let's do something. And then I find myself saying, well, why don't you call? And before I get that out of my mouth, there are none of her friends who have been her lifelong friends, even her sisters, who many days are able to go do anything. So we find ourselves at this place, if we don't have a set of younger friends, we're kind of out there, and here we are. So, for us, but it's a gift to give to other people, isn't it? It really is. Some best practices. Pair youth and college students with older mentors. We've not done that officially. We've not said, Todd and Dodie, you guys are paired. You all work together. We've not said that. But I have watched to be sure that somebody was nurturing somebody, or I've said, would you mind sitting by, when she comes in, why don't you make sure she's there? Every time I know somebody new is coming, I try to point out that person's going to be there and get several people to make sure they're watching and being hospitable. But especially with youth, because they'll be extremely nervous when they step into a group of adults, primarily adults. They'll be so nervous. Not unlike I would be, but differently nervous. If you can imagine how nervous you would be to go sing with a high school choir, if you were called up to go sing and sit in with a high school choir as a member, not as a consultant. All right, reverse that, see. Yeah.
It'd be similar, I would imagine. Be flexible with school and other schedules. Recognize that this participation may be seasonal. The kids in our choir who do marching band have had to miss a lot in contest weeks. They've had to miss when they were in musicals and they were in plays or dramas and all these things. They always have to miss. The college kids get all busy during Beta sing, and they get busy at certain times, and and life just catches up with them, and it's hard. And you have to be patient with those things. I think you have to be gracious. Find opportunities to share intergenerational stories within rehearsal and elsewhere. One of the things that we do in our group fairly often is we'll ask the question, so what does choir mean to you? Or about once a year, I think 2 years ago this fall, we had a series where I didn't plan to do this series, but I asked the question, so why do you choose to spend an hour of your time here every week? And I said, let's all think about that for a moment. And then I called on somebody that I knew always would have a ready answer. And Tim, could you answer that question for us? And then Tim said something. And then next week, I called on somebody else and called on somebody else. And just kept on. We spent probably 8 or 10 weeks taking 3 minutes for somebody to talk about why do I choose to spend a week, an hour of my week doing this. And it turned out to be very rich. And then the word got out to the congregation, and somebody said, we should write a newsletter article about this. This is really, really good. And people, told some beautiful stories, about, you can imagine the beauty of those stories. But it was delightful. I would also say, another thing that I do in my life is I direct the Beta Men's Choir. And the story piece, I will say this story to highlight that. One of the things that we do with the Beta Men's Choir is every Tuesday, we rehearse Tuesday, Thursday for an hour and 15 minutes. But every Tuesday, we have a member, a guy in the group, come forward and say, why do I love men's choir? I love men's choir because. Every single Tuesday, somebody gives a testimony of why I love men's choir. So what does that do for the Beta Men's Choir? And we do the same thing for the church choir. What does it do for the Beta Men's Choir? What does it accomplish? Well, I don't have to, go ahead.
It gives them a sense of clarity.
That's right. I don't have to put a big thing up in our rehearsal space that says, the mission statement of the Beta Men's Choir is, right? I don't have to say, what we're really doing here is this and this and this. I don't have to say any of that, because who's saying it? They are saying it. They are saying exactly why I do what I do. We also start out every rehearsal with the Beta Men's Choir by introducing 4 people per rehearsal. And it's like, today I want you to meet Myra, and Myra is from Florida, and she loves to eat this, and her favorite color is this, and a special fact about Myra is, and we have these guys that always do the introductions, and they're the bigger than life people, all this stuff, and it's all rowdy and all kind of stuff, and it's intimidating to the new people until they learn this is really cool, whatever. But it's building community. It's building community. And really, a big part of what you do in rehearsal every week is build community. You create a space that people can't live without. Okay? You create a space that people can't imagine. We have a man in our choir who's a therapist, and he counsels on Wednesday night, but he is always there, about 10 minutes late, but always, always, always there. And he says, this is the one thing in my week that I never give up. I need this in the middle of my week in a big, big way. Utilize soloists, youth as soloists. If you can use a youth person to do a solo, and you could use an older adult person, whom do you choose?
Youth.
Always the youth. I can't imagine an older person not being glad the youth person got that, right? How many of us in here have had our time to sing solos? And if I don't sing another solo, and someone else does, thanks be to God. It's okay. It's all right. Yeah. Spend time each week visiting personally with youth and college members. We've talked about that already. Place younger people in positions within the choir to offer them maximum advantage, or that they can provide maximum help in some instances they can often do that as well. But you really want to make them comfortable. We have a young woman in our choir who sometimes comes in late, and if she does, she'll literally she'll pull up a chair behind the group. And then I'll always kind of signal somebody to open up space and literally bring her into the circle. You know, so that I cannot function when I think somebody is uncomfortable. That is one of my, it's just one of my things. If I think somebody is outside the circle and they're not feeling included, my empathy just goes berserk. And I want to make everybody feel good. The other day there were some kids in worship here that didn't have a hymnal. And they were, I've noticed they didn't know what to do, and they didn't realize what to do. And where to look for a hymnal, and I was just dying. It was just killing me. So I found the hymnal and went over there, and I thought long and hard, do I risk doing this or not? You know, is this going to be more, or what should I do about this? But I just had to help. So I'm not saying yes to me. I'm saying be a person who cares. You know, be somebody who, you know, being part of things is really important for you. Yeah, be that person, I think. Publicly thank people in rehearsal for the sacrifices they are making, and find new ways to do that. I think there should never be a group of volunteer choir members who meet on whatever night you meet, and they don't go away feeling that somebody's glad they were there. It is very easy to rail at the people who were there about the ones who didn't come. And there was a day in my life when I did a good bit of that. But it occurred to me one time that I should go home and write a thank you note to everybody who came to choir tonight instead of writing it to the absentees. And so sometimes I have been known to send everybody an email who was there, a personal email, rather than reaching out to the ones who weren't. Saying thanks for being there. Your presence really meant a lot tonight. So sometimes if you reverse something, it makes a big difference. Listen carefully to their ideas about repertoire and preferences. If somebody cares enough to offer their preferences and their ideas, you listen to them. And listen carefully. It's important. Seek to develop the highest possible choral product. When you read through these testimonials, which we won't have time to read through, but when you read through them, they'll talk about, we have high expectations, and we make good music. They feel good about the music that we make. Sing texts that are meaningful to all ages. Texts that are timeless. And when you're reading a text, say, how would that text play for fill in the blank? How would that text play here? And let it, make sure it works. Sing music that's a strong appeal to any age. Selections may be highly engaging. Must be highly engaging. Questions to ask, what makes this piece special? If your answer is, well, not really anything, it's just kind of all right. Well, you need to find a better piece. You need to find something that's better. At least because if you don't think it's special, how in the world do you expect somebody else to think it's special? See, you're the one responsible for selling this music to this group. And you know, people often ask me, why do you choose such variety in all the music that you choose for your groups? Well, there's one big answer. I don't want to get bored. Okay. If you have a high level of musical boredom, you will probably choose better music, actually. What makes it stand out? Highlight and encourage family units. Family units to sing in your group. Encourage that, and that's a way that I'm going to reach out to some parents in the next few weeks as we get ready to gear back up with rehearsals and say, to the 7th grade parents, it would be really beautiful if you all would come together and do this. And I can use a personal experience because our son has sung in our church choir quite a lot, and it's often been the only time that, and sometimes our daughter, it's been the only time that the three of us were together all week. And it would oftentimes be, I think in high school, it might be the only thing that we shared in common that we could actually have a really positive conversation about. That we had done some mutual activity about which we could talk. You see? So that's worth a lot, isn't it? For anybody that's had a teenager around your life, that's a big deal. Yeah. Point out frequently the power of music to shape and transform us. Yeah. Send weekly email messages with encouragement. I send a message every Wednesday morning that's called This Week with the Calvary Choir, and it has a date. And I thank them for something about Sunday and highlight something about what they did on Sunday in their leadership, and a little 3 or 4 sentence paragraph. And then I say, this Sunday we're singing whatever. Here is a link to this Sunday's anthem. I can't wait to see you in choir tonight. We're looking for a full house, and you're all going to be, I don't know, something. Just a little motivational thing. And then I usually have upcoming, and I have, like, when we start in August, I will tell them what Wednesday nights we're going to extend rehearsals in November, starting in November. And I'll have all of that. So they have it for ages. Yeah. And they know all of those things. But I do that every week. I also do that for the men's choir. I send out something every Monday night that has everything I can imagine that they would need to know for the next week. Plan long in advance, so they're always aware of where you're going. Our choir has music planned through September right now. When we get started by by Labor Day is my drop dead date. By Labor Day, they will have everything through the beginning of February. And then in January, they will have everything through the end of September again. So I plan in 3 cycles. I used to plan in 4, but I do 3 now. Have a list of go-to pieces for summer, spring break, those weaker times. Avoid works that are intentionally written for very large choirs with big instrumental ensembles. So something that has too many parts and too many pieces, people will get frustrated with because they won't be able to achieve it at a level that they think is acceptable. So make sure you choose well. Not easy, but well. Yeah. Know the ability of the group and push them to their limits. Yeah, push to the limit, but don't overwhelm them. There's that fine space in there of what that really means. Make a place for students who are home for spring break. I often, when we have kids coming home for the summer, spring break, holidays, I will always email those kids in the fall and say, which Sundays are you here during Advent? And if they play instruments, we include them or put them in some way. And we really utilize kids who are home, try to utilize them. Encourage choir members to invite their friends to sing with the choir, especially during the summer nights. Yeah, there are choir member testimonials. I asked our choir last week to hold on sharing this time with you, and I asked them to answer 3 questions. How has the intergenerational model been meaningful to you? What best practices would you offer to others who might be considering pursuing this model? And then the last one, why do you think this model's been successful for us? And then I have a bunch of people on the email list who don't sing in our choir, like the parents of every kid. And so this guy whose spouse and child sing in the choir just wrote me this input, and I thought it was worth including on the very last page. So you've got some good input here. Some things that come out in these testimonials, the word hospitality comes out a lot. Inclusiveness is around in those often. Challenge, appreciation, family, feeling safe, being healthy, dialogue, community, collaboration, consistency is all over the place, excellence, prayer, and what this means to the family are things that come out a lot. I could go on, and I've got more notes, but let's take 5 minutes, our last 5 minutes, for some questions that you might have, something that might have occurred to you that you'd like to ask.
For vocal ensemble and instrumentalists, are they paid or volunteer?
The only paid people are the pianists and the organists. Everybody else is volunteer. And the range of the instrumentalist abilities is like a high school sophomore to a Baylor trumpet professor.
Wow.
So it's a very wide range, but beautiful. Good question. 7th grade, because we have a good children's choir program and that sings well and does good work. So 7th grade is our beginning point. This year, for the first time, we have a kid, at least one boy, whose voice hasn't changed, and we haven't had that yet. And so we'll negotiate that. And have him sit by the tenors, but in the alto section. And his mom sings alto, and then we have a couple of cooler people in the alto section, that I might connect him with. But I'll place him carefully, so he's excited about singing with us, and I'm thrilled about that too.
How many on a general Wednesday night, how many students, 7th through 12th grade, are involved with the congregation?
About 7 through 12. The total, there would be about 20 kids in a youth group that's
Okay.
right before choir. They go up to 7.
How is that schedule adjusted to accommodate being able to, so that you're able to meet, they do their thing earlier?
They meet from 6 to 7, and then we meet from 7 to 8.
Is there a family meal provided?
There is,
Okay.
yeah, from 5 to 6. Yeah. That's challenging for our church, more and more and more challenging. What do you serve? What will people eat? Will they come? You serve, they don't. You go over the budget. I bet this is true for your church too. Do we do this or not? If you don't, it's not good. If you do, it wasn't what you should have done. It's not really like that. It's not people complain. They just bring their own food or something,
Is everything concluded at 8?
Everything concludes at 8.
Okay. I'm trying to think, in
Yeah.
a family dynamic, you found a good way to work, so when's the children's choir meet?
From 6 to 7.
Okay.
Well, 6 to 6:40, from 5:45 to 6:45.
So
We've done that
family can-
because otherwise all the children's choir people come in so late for other choir and it's disruptive. So we've scheduled it,
A little bit.
give a little buffer in there.
So family can come together and actually
Yeah.
leave together.
Yeah. And upper grade school kids, preschool kids, their parents need to get them home and get them onto bed before 8. Because if you leave the church at 8, you won't get your kid to bed before 9 or 9:15. By the time you get home and do baths and all that. But upper level kids, their parents typically, Wednesday night, they'll stay a little bit late, and we have childcare provided for all ages, all the way through the intergenerational choir experience.
That's helpful.
So
Yeah.
on Sunday morning, do you have a service that includes everybody, or do you have like a Sunday school separately?
We have Sunday school for all age groups, and then we have worship together. So Sunday school from 9:30 to 10:30, and then worship from 10:45 to 12.
Okay. And then no youth group afterwards or something on Sunday?
Right. They only have their Sunday school, and then they have an evening. The youth group has an evening 6 to 7:30 gathering every Sunday night. But that's the only always Sunday night activity we have. We don't have a Sunday night, other Sunday night church. Yeah. Other questions or observations?
Sorry.
Okay, that's good.
So you mentioned a lot of things that you do in rehearsal to build community, make people feel welcome, and then also spending time with each member, outside of the rehearsal. I was wondering if you do any sort of activities or things outside the rehearsal, but in a group setting, to help connect people.
We have
things like
a
that.
monthly birthday party after rehearsal. We just don't have a lot of time for social stuff. I don't have a lot of time. And we do a big Christmas party. That's a tradition we have in our choir, and that's been it's just really a lot of fun. We always talk about doing this. We do an officer group. We don't do a whole lot, but the president leads the prayer time at the end of rehearsal. We stop 5 minutes early and always have a prayer time and prayer request and a few announcements and stuff at the end. So we really have get about 45 minutes of rehearsal out of that hour, when you warm up and everything. But I always start on time. I always start on time, and oftentimes there's like 7 of us there, 6 or 7. But I always start on time, no matter what.
And how many anthems are you working on a given week?
About 6. But we'll have 10, I always say, our music associate, I would like 10 or 12 pieces in our folder at a time. Because these things may not go well, and I may need to jump over here, or the energy may be really low, and we need to jump to something else, or all that. So I like to have a lot of options. But we're never rehearsing just this Sunday. We're always at least 3 or 4 weeks out, unless we're just in a crisis moment.